Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're all doing wonderfully well. Today I've got a discussion video for you, on a topic that has been rolling around my mind for a long time now. I've gone back and forth as to whether I wanted to make this video for probably at least 6 months. But the recent release of the Casablanca 4K Collector's Edition finally sold me on making it and putting it out there. So I'd like to take just a few minutes today to talk about one aspect of collecting that is a very popular one, and that's collecting steelbooks, both Blu-ray and 4K. Interestingly, in my personal journey, it was steelbooks that first caught my eye back in 2018 and led to the early stages of my revival in film collecting, after a good few years out of it completely. There was just something about the premium looking casing and unique looking artwork that captured my eyes and my imagination. Here was a physical presentation of the film where the physical media could mirror the film itself in terms of excellence. It seemed like they could be a wonderful display of film artwork that no other physical media I'd ever seen at that point could match, and as a collection be something different and far superior to the DVD collection I had at that point, and the Blu-ray collections I'd seen of others. It seemed to me a way to set your collection apart as something really special, and let's face it, Steelbook is a pretty impressive sounding name. So after a while of looking at them and becoming interested, I decided to dip my toe into collecting again, and I purchased 4 Steelbooks, 2 Star Wars and 2 Star Trek. The first time I held one, I thought it was pretty great. Perhaps not as much weight to it as I had hoped, but it was certainly something special, particularly in comparison to my usual DVD cases that I was used to. It felt cool and expensive, and it was probably at that moment that I was back into the world of collecting, though it took a while longer before I really got into the swing of things. But those 4 pickups started me on a journey of slowly acquiring more steelbooks, though it was yet early days, and unbeknownst to me, the ones I'd purchased were more or less leftovers, and so much cheaper than the norm. But it didn't take long before I soon discovered the steep cost of steelbook collecting, the limited quantities, and that scalping in the steelbook collecting space is absolutely rife, and in my opinion, easily one of the worst things about it. Fast forward to the end of 2022, and I have a reasonably sized steelbook collection now, though nowhere near what others might have. I do still quite like some steelbook releases, especially for the big franchises that I enjoy, like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings for example. And I'm particularly thankful that we've just in this last year got some actually good looking Indiana Jones ones too, as opposed to those ghastly white ones that came out previously. Over the years though, my thoughts have changed a lot and tend to go back and forth, and I found myself recently reconsidering whether I even want to continue collecting steelbooks at all. I found over the last year that I've purchased far fewer than I was buying before, and whether that's something I've consciously done or subconsciously, I'm not too sure. So far this year, I think my total is under 15 that I've added to my collection. So I'd like to touch on a few areas in particular which I've been considering. The first concern I have is the space for them, and particularly the space to display them. I suppose it's the same with all the titles we pick up really, but I feel like artwork is such a big part of what makes steelbooks so special, and not all of us have the space for a steelbook wall where you can properly appreciate the wonderful designs. A vast majority of the time it's just going to be the spines that we see, even with a fairly decent rotation of display if you have the space for 2 or 3 facing out at one time or another. If that's the case, is it really worth it to just keep accumulating more? So many steelbooks that I have just a very plain and boring spines. I seem to see more and more that are just plain black with a film title on them. I mean, for an artwork heavy product, it's just a poor show in my opinion. I'd say that in fact pretty much all of my boutique Blu-ray releases have better and nicer looking spines than probably half my steelbooks. The next area to consider is damage. Man, are these things fragile. I saw a funny comment on Reddit a while back where someone said all they had to do was sneeze in an adjacent room and the steelbook would get damaged. It's definitely something that made me laugh, but they weren't far wrong. How often, and let's face it mostly from Zavvi in the UK, Or in the US, I think Best Buy are the main culprit. Do steelbooks come with spine slash, or dints, dings or worse when they arrive in the post? A small scratch in the wrong place can basically wreck a decent looking steelbook so that you wouldn't want to display it anymore, and also tanking its value if that's something that you care about. If anyone watched my video about my favourite pickups from 2021 all the way back at the beginning of this year, one of them for me was Mantelab's Interstellar, one of my favourite films that I was over the moon to get a premium release for. Well, back around the middle of the year, I was just cleaning near my collection where I had the Interstellar Steelbook out and displayed because, let's face it, it is gorgeous, and I accidentally knocked the bookcase. The steelbook fell probably no more than a couple feet or so, but it's now dented and it's really hurt the look of the steelbook. Not only am I absolutely gutted because I've damaged one, but also because of the steep cost of the release, and it's one of my favourites, which is why I had it out on display in the first place, which pains me even further, as now I can't really display it anymore without constantly seeing the damage. So for anyone that needs a reminder, do be careful when you're cleaning near your collection or dusting it. It barely needs to be said, but I've dropped plenty of Blu-ray cases in my time, and of course they are fine afterwards. Cheap plastic that they are pretty sturdy. Steelbooks, not so much. The next area is cost. Especially in comparison to other releases, steelbooks are, for the most part, very expensive. For most new releases, you're talking about at least £30, though there has been some increase even over that more recently, particularly with the bigger franchises like Marvel coming in now at $32.99, or the recent Pulp Fiction, which I think is $34.99. With other brands like Titans of Cult, their prices increased from £30 for a release to now $35. Personally, I went off Titans of Cult fairly quickly and haven't purchased one for a long time. But I think even if I was keeping up with the releases, the increase to £35 would have had me done with buying from them. Then of course you get onto the premium releases from companies like HD Zeta or Mantelab. Often limited to around 1,000 copies, these releases are much more sought after and cost around £45-ish for a Blu-ray release, and then I've found it's usually about £15 for the delivery, so £60 total cost for a Blu-ray release, and even more for a 4K, and that's just for the single editions. For a one-click edition where you might get 2 or 3 in a package overall, the cost and shipping can be a lot more. Of course, these releases are more premium. They come with extras and usually include a nice sturdy slipbox with unique artwork. The steelbook included will have something like debossing or embossing, spot gloss for example. But despite that, £60 for a single film release is very steep to say the least, but more on premiums later. Even for standard releases, £30 per film, that's a lot of money. Then we move on to something that's been on my mind a lot recently, and that's longevity. Will these things stand the test of time? Lots of us will have things like the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition DVD sets. Now I can't fully remember exactly when they came out, but they're probably approaching about 20 years old now, for Fellowship of the Ring anyway. While mine certainly don't look brand new, I'm actually delighted with how they've held up over the years. They've survived, at the time, my young hands. They've survived more house moves than I can think of, more rewatches than I care to count. They've fallen over, been dropped and been on display for years and years, and they are still doing great even after all this time. I'm sure lots of us have plenty of examples of titles we've had for decades that are still in stellar condition and prized possessions. Contrast that to my Mantelab Interstellar, which I've had for what, about a year? And though the slipbox is still fine, the steelbook is damaged, so much so that I don't want to display it anymore. So add to that the ease of dents, the ease of scratches, which I feel are much more damaging and noticeable with steelbooks, and who knows what alternate dimensions scratches can come from. I feel like it's almost sock-like in quality, where there's just some alternate reality where all of the socks we've lost over the years live. Scratches can seem to come out of thin air and out of this alternate dimension as well. Who knows how they got there, but once there, they don't leave. Also, while it's not exactly likely unless you've got them in a very humid area, rust is a distant possibility as well. I will say that I'm much happier with sets like Lord of the Rings, for example, or the recent Matrix set, and I believe Game of Thrones and Harry Potter also have the same thing, where it comes in a nice steel casing and protection inside, which I think is an excellent and perfect way to present the steelbooks while keeping them more properly safe. Of course, that's on the caveat that they arrive without damage. My copy of the Hobbit trilogy from Zavvi literally came in an empty box. No bubble wrap, no protection, nothing. It was a miracle it wasn't damaged, and plenty of others were not so lucky. But especially considering the steep cost of steelbooks, will they even stand the test of time? In 20 years, will I still have my Lord of the Rings steelbook set looking as good as it does today? Or for the franchises that we love, are the other collector's editions a better call for longevity? The Skywalker Saga set, or the Middle-earth Ultimate Collector's Edition, for example. Now let's talk about the history, or really the change that steelbook releases have undergone in the last few years. And it's here that the recent Casablanca release has brought this back to the foreground of my mind again. So let's take some older Zavvi releases, such as Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, or 2001 A Space Odyssey, for example. Take a look at these beauties. You've got embossing, debossing, great looking artwork, and what feels like something quite special. Now take a look and compare them to these recent releases of the James Bond steelbooks. Flat as a pancake, shockingly awful artwork, which looks like it took someone about 5 minutes on Photoshop to create. This is something that I've seen more and more of, a lack of effort in the releases. Releases which look boring, plain, and overall cheap. Take a look at these releases of Star Trek the original series. That is bare metal that you're seeing there. They haven't even bothered to completely colorise it. Literally, they've just left it bare metal. In my humble opinion, that is an absolute disgrace, especially when compared with how they look and how the artwork looks on websites, with a nice white finish to them. And that's exactly what we've got with the Casablanca steelbook. Bare metal. It's such low effort, cheap looking, and incredibly disappointing in my opinion. Especially when it looked, to me at least, like we were going to get a nice cream coloured background for the front artwork to sit on. These days we don't even expect any embossing or a border or spot gloss or anything like that from more standard releases. And it seems like they want us to not even expect paint and colour to be on them as well. The standards have slipped so enormously that it makes me think, is it even worth it? We get plain spines, boring artwork, cheap matte finishes. Just compare the Indiana Jones they had in the States to the one that we got here. You can see the nicer gloss that the US got and the flatter matte finish that we got. Why on earth was that done? Well, that's anyone's guess. Lastly, let's talk about premium steelbooks in some more depth. These days, more than ever before, I think, not all steelbooks are created equally. Thankfully, we do have some manufacturers that are still making steelbooks with interesting artwork that feel premium and quality, with the embossing, debossing, borders, spot gloss and the like. Pieces of art in their own right. Of course, these unfortunately come with a much larger price tag, but you do get some extras for your money if you're lucky enough to get your hands on one. And in a slight turn of events, these are the reasons that I'm actually going to still collect premium steelbooks when one comes out that I think is worth it. These companies are carrying the torch for steelbooks and taking up the mantle of creating ones that are truly special. Being encased in a slip box I think gives that little bit of extra protection to the steelbook itself, as well as being another form of presenting some lovely artwork, preferably for me in lenticular form for the film. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got companies like HD Zeta, Mantalab, Blue Fans, Film Arena, also the Wheat Collection, Nova Media and World Cinema Library, as well as more exclusive ones like UHD Club, all carrying the torch for steelbooks at the moment. We did have a good one called Everything Blue in the UK, which ended up getting bought out, though I will say they had only for the most part the generic steelbooks inside, which was a little disappointing to me at least, though their outer packaging was excellent. But I hope we can get even more companies creating these and putting out great collector's editions that are worthy of the name. One other company that I will mention that I do quite like as well, though they aren't really a premium company, is Mondo, who specifically makes steelbooks with a particular style of artwork that is very different to what is widely released. And also their editions come with a nice clear slipcover. They are limited, and mostly at the moment they're just doing the MCU steelbooks, which I've personally lost interest in, but I still really like what they are doing as a company and definitely think they are worth mentioning. But unfortunately for premiums overall, due to the far steeper price, it does mean a film is going to have to be a favourite or something extremely special for me to fork out to try to get a hold of a copy going forward. So in conclusion then, certainly for me, my future in collecting steelbooks will be through the premium brands, unless it's something like Casablanca for example, where it's a great collector's edition that happens to come with a steelbook as the only option. Personally, I would have much preferred what they did with Citizen Kane, and given us an option at least for it to include the standard Amaret with a slipcover inside for a cheaper price. But I'm more or less done with standard steelbooks and have been for some time given my purchase history this last year, for the time being anyway. The drastic dip in quality, the cost, the longevity, the space, and something I didn't mention, but also the constant re-releases of the same titles again and again, mean that my interest in steelbooks is currently at an all-time low. For me, I'm going to be spending my money elsewhere. But just for all the steelbooks that you currently have in your collection, just to reiterate an earlier point, do be careful when cleaning them, or even cleaning near them. And that's it for my thoughts around steelbook collecting. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, whether you agree or disagree. Do you love collecting steelbooks at the moment, or have you noticed that you haven't been buying as many? It's a topic worthy of discussion, with no right or wrong answer, and I'd love to hear what more people think about it. But that's the lot for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.